This signal, it matches a wartime frequency.
That's not possible. Confirm it, now.
Sub-Officer Threx Ulmore of the Nyxari Assembly had exactly 4 seconds to decide whether the noise rattling through his console counted as an act of war. It didn't sound like one. It sounded like somebody dragging a stick along a fence, if the fence were also screaming. He was 3 months into monitoring duty on the listening pylon buried under Plot 14 of the Chestnut Grove allotments, a posting so quiet his last report had been about a fox. So when the resonance spike hit, he did what any professional does with an unprecedented reading at 0630. He wrote unclear, recurring, low priority, and went to get more crystalline tea. 2 allotments over, I was having a considerably worse morning. My name's Neil Hobbs, I'm 34, and I was standing in a dressing gown that used to belong to my dad, shaking a bit of carved wood at some pigeons who decided my tomato seedlings were a continental breakfast. It was too early for this. I hadn't even had tea yet, and here I was, barefoot in wet grass, negotiating with birds. The wood was my grandfather's, an old wooden clacker, the kind you spin so the little hinged paddle claps against the frame, loud enough to scare crows off a cabbage patch. He used to do it every August without fail, muttering about cheeky beggars the whole time, like the pigeons had personally wronged him. I'd found a whole shoebox of them clearing out his shed after he passed, alongside a bag of tomato feed, and a mug that said World's Okayest Gardener. Figured I'd put one to use. So I spun it. Pigeons scattered. Mission accomplished, I thought, and went to put the kettle on. Threx, however, did not go get more tea. He came back to a second spike, same signature, cleaner this time, longer, and forwarded it to the science division because that's what you do with a reading that makes your console's alert light change to a color you didn't know it had. Xenoacoustic researcher Dr. Sevrai had spent 11 years cataloging dead languages of dead civilizations, and she recognized the waveform before the file had even finished loading. She just didn't want to. She ran it against the archive 3 separate times, hoping for a different answer each time, and got the same one 3 times, an 82% harmonic match to the cascade frequency. The cascade frequency, for context, was the resonance pattern that had ended the Threb Accord War by liquefying an entire crystalline research colony's neural lattice from the inside, colony and all, in under 6 minutes. Historians still argued over who deployed it first. Nobody argued over what it had done. It had been banned under treaty line for the same season the war ended, with all 17 surviving signatory species agreeing, unanimously and immediately, that nothing was worth building it again. Category 4. The kind of weapon that doesn't get manufactured anymore because the last people who manufactured it don't exist anymore either. She sent it up the chain with 3 exclamation points, which for a Nyxari scientist is the equivalent of screaming. Grand Marshal Corveth Drell did not scream. He read the report twice in total silence, called an emergency session of exactly 3 people, because that's all the pylon had, and asked a single question. Source location? The answer came back and made him wish he'd asked something easier. Source: unshielded surface structure. Category: civilian residential. Defensive installations detected. None. Military signature. None. Just a small wooden building, what the natives apparently called a shed, sitting in an open field, entirely unguarded, radiating the exact waveform that had once erased a colony. That was the moment the horror set in properly, because a weapon behind 12 layers of shielding is a threat you can measure. A weapon sitting in an unlocked garden shed, next to a rake, is a civilization that doesn't consider it a weapon at all. Threx pulled visual. What he saw did not help. A human, soft, unarmored, dressing gown flapping in the breeze, was walking back toward the shed carrying an empty mug, whistling something with no discernible melody, and setting the device down among the garden tools with the exact same care most species reserve for a spoon. He's putting it away, Threx reported, his voice climbing half an octave. He's putting a Category 4 device away, next to trowels. There's a trowel touching it, sir. Is the trowel also a weapon? Corveth Drell asked, in the flat tone of a man who genuinely no longer knew the answer, and was starting to suspect it might be yes. Dr. On, still running numbers, delivered the line that actually broke the room. The signature Neil had produced wasn't a fluke, wasn't a rare prototype, wasn't a one-off. It was a mass-manufactured object. The colony's own atmospheric scans were picking up dozens more of the exact same acoustic signature scattered across the wider region, gardens, allotments, farms, all humming faintly, all unregistered, all completely ignored. "There isn't one," she said. "There are hundreds. He has more in a box, in a shed, next to plant food." Corvette asked her to repeat that.
She did.
It didn't get better the second time. Corvette stared at the readout for a long moment before speaking the sentence that would end up in the incident report, word for word. "They are using a banned strategic weapon to inconvenience birds." Nobody on the pylon had an answer to that. There wasn't a protocol for it. Every simulation the Assembly had ever run assumed a Category 4 device would be wielded with intent by a soldier, a fanatic, a desperate commander in a losing war, someone who at minimum knew what they were holding and why it mattered. Nobody had modeled for a man in a dressing gown who just wanted his tomatoes left alone, and who had, with zero understanding of what he held, casually deployed the same frequency that once ended a war, then gone inside and made toast, humming, off-key, to himself. Back on the ground, blissfully unaware he'd triggered anything besides a pigeon's flight response, I was leaning on the fence telling my neighbor Carol about it. "Granddad used to do this every summer," I said, giving the clacker one more experimental spin just to check it still worked. "Crows never came near his cabbages. Reckon it's the noise, sets their teeth on edge, or whatever birds have instead of teeth." Carol asked if she could borrow one for her runner beans. I said I had a whole box, take your pick, and while I was at it I told Gerald from Plot 9 the same thing when he wandered over asking what all the racket was. Gerald took two, in case one wore out. Up on the pylon, that exchange was intercepted, translated, and read aloud in a briefing room that went completely silent. Grand Marshal Drell requested confirmation 3 separate times that "take your pick" meant what the translation matrix said it meant, because the alternative, that this species handed out planet-ending ordnance to neighbors the way you'd lend a hedge trimmer, was somehow worse than anything in the original report. The Assembly filed Earth as a Tier 1 exclusion zone within the hour. Not for hostility. For unpredictability, which every field manual agrees is worse. Their official note read, "Species demonstrates casual, unsupervised access to Category 4 resonance weaponry for the stated purpose of pest control. Distribution to neighboring individuals observed without hesitation, negotiation, or apparent awareness of severity. Recommend indefinite non-engagement." It was, according to the archivist who filed it, the shortest threat assessment in Assembly history and the one that got escalated fastest. Threx spent the rest of his posting reassigned to a listening station on a much duller moon and considered it a promotion. Me, I never did work out why the pigeons stayed off for almost 3 weeks that year. Longest they'd ever kept away. Figured the clacker just did a better job than usual. Told Carol it might be the wood. Older grain holds the sound better, or so I've heard. Might get an electric one next year, though. Save my wrist. Carol's runner beans, for what it's worth, have never looked better. She reckons she might sell the extra ones at the church fete. God help whichever species is listening in on that.